Yo, another change of plans for this 2018 Gaming Diary series. I know it's been kinda messy already, but hear me out. As you've probably witnessed, there's a lot of games I've covered in there where I simply couldn't say much aside from saying some basic stuff everyone already knows. Also, I don't think everyone enjoys watching 10 minutes long videos about random opinions on random games, so I'll be focusing on making some 3 to 5 minute long standalone videos on specific games. I hope you'll enjoy this new format, as I think it's much more intuitive. And today I'll be talking about Professor Layton and Pandora's Box, and Professor Layton and the Lost Future. Professor Layton and the Diabolical Box was really great. I like how the game is presented at first. You expect to spend a lot of time on the train, and the story seems pretty linear. In that regards, it's way easier to navigate around rooms, since there are way less places to lose yourself into. I mean, in a Layton game, I think it's more important to focus on dialogues and puzzles more than navigation, unlike an Ace Attorney game, where the point-and-click aspect is much more than that. But Layton can be interesting without having to waltz around huge areas. I don't think it's necessary. So I liked roaming around in those train wagons more than in Icarus Village in some parts. However, that doesn't last too long, since you end up fairly fast in a little village, and the freedom you had in the first game grows back a little. Then you go back on the train and end up in one final big city. That makes the pacing really enjoyable, having to switch between phases either more linear or open than the previous ones. And False Sense is absolutely beautiful. The atmosphere in this place is phenomenal. First of all, the backgrounds are stunning and definitely something else than the Icarus Village, and the recurring characters help the game to feel more personal than the previous one. I also enjoyed the new riddles much more than in the first game. They are actually well implemented into the story, instead of simply being, oh, that reminds me of a puzzle. They're much more physical, and make a better use of the touchscreen as well, and a lot of them are quite fun. Honestly, some puzzles in the first game were so math-related that it really pissed me off sometimes, but here, I can only remember 3 or 4 that pissed me off to the same extent. And taking into account that there are even more puzzles in this one than in the previous game, that's definitely a sign of improvement. Even the little minigames were fun to go through. The camera block puzzle ends up giving the players the opportunity to play spots different games which are, well, to be honest, not that intriguing. There's one where you have to use blocks to make it so that your hamster walks as much as possible, and it gets trickier and trickier. And if you finish every levels, the hamster will find hint coins for you. And the last one is the most intriguing. You can brew tea with the ingredients you find throughout the game, and there are up to 26 possible recipes. Some characters will be stressed out in the city, and if you brew them the correct recipe, you're gonna gain more information on the town or about the people themselves. That's a really simple yet interesting process to get yourself involved in the story. So, overall, the Diabolical Box is definitely a must-play. Now on to the third episode. The Unwound Future. This one is the most dearly beloved of absolutely everyone, so my expectations were quite high. And honestly, during the first half of the game, I've gotta admit, I was almost a bit disappointed. But before that, I'd like to commend the developers for polishing the game to such a deep end. The notes are much more useful than before. Most riddles are very different from the others, you can have a bonus hint during the puzzles much more easier than the first 3, and even artistically speaking, they really juked it out here. Dubbed lines are even more present than before, CGs and cutscenes are all over the place, and there are quite a few places to visit. Even the game felt much longer than the previous 2, and that brings me to one of the only thing that bugged me in this game. Out of the 13 chapters, I'd say the story starts to become interesting starting after only chapter 8. Before that, it's mostly a build-up. Sure, you go to many different places and learn more about the environment, but you don't really learn much about the other characters in town. And even atmospherically speaking, I'll get killed for this one, but I honestly prefer the first 2 games here. The only place where I could actually feel some unique vibes was in Chinatown, which is to me one of the best places the game had to offer, and truly something more different than usual. But by far the biggest strength of this episode is the writing and story. It's one of the only games where you see Layton actually being affected and emotional, and it's all because of his yet untold past. So throughout the later chapters of the game, you'll learn more about himself, his past girlfriend, and some stuff I obviously can't tell without spoiling. And truly the twists, as far-fetched or predictable as they could be, were truly entertaining and sometimes quite surprising. When you think you've figured out the far end of the story, there's even more to it, and the final scene really affected me and was a perfect way to end the trilogy. Some of you might ask me which one is my favorite out of the first 3, And honestly, I can't answer. Maybe The Curious Village is my least favorite, but it's still excellent. And I adore the atmosphere and world building of Pandora's Box, but I love the writing and the serious tone of The Unknown Future. I think these games are great for their own reasons, and it'd be a shame to fight it out on some lousy details just to find a true winner. So there you have it, my fresh thoughts on this very great and promising series. I won't play the second trilogy just yet, since I want to dive into a little investigation before that. With that, I'll see you around in another video. See ya!